Okay, so let us begin. We can begin with 3 bows to the Buddha. 1, 2, 3. And then we do the salutation to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, so we will be now continuing with our reading of the Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Fours, the numerical discourses. And now we come to Sutta number 170. And this sutta has some rather technical, let's say, it's a bit of a technical sutta, dealing with some of the intricacies of the development of meditation up to the realization of the supermundane or world transcending attainments. And the sutta is spoken not by the Buddha himself, but by Venerable Ananda. And what's interesting and a bit revealing, in the very first opening sentence of the sutta, it states that on such an occasion, the Venerable Ananda was dwelling at Kosambi and Gosita's park, but there's no mention of where the Buddha was dwelling at the time. Usually, even when another monk is going to speak a sutta, the sutta will still begin by saying, at that time, the Blessed One was dwelling maybe at Chaita's Grove and Shravasti. But here the Buddha is not mentioned, which is in a way I would interpret this to mean that the sutta is spoken after the Buddha has passed away. So Venerable Ananda was the Buddha's attendant, and of course he outlived the Buddha by, I don't know how many years, 20 to 40 years, I'm not sure exactly. And so this sutta was spoken apparently after the Buddha's passing. And so Ananda addresses the monks, and then he says, whatever bhikkhu or bhikkhuni, monk or nun, has declared the attainment of arahantship in my presence, has done so by these 4 paths, or by a certain one amongst them. Actually, when it says by these 4 paths or by a certain one amongst them, we should interpret this to mean by one of these 4 paths, or one of these 4 ways. And then the commentary has an important gloss on the word 4 paths. Chatu would be, in the instrumental case, chatuhi magehi. So it says, the commentary, so it says, by the 4 patipada magehi, which means 4 paths of practice, 4 ways of practice, not arya magehi, not by the noble paths. So the noble paths, as interpreted within the framework of the commentaries, which is based on the Abhidharma system, in this system, the arya magga, the noble path, is taken to be a single mind moment event, which we call the breakthrough to the unconditioned. So it's a breakthrough experience in which the faculty of wisdom has the function of eliminating, eradicating some of the fetters that bind one to the cycle of repeated birth and death. And so at the conclusion of the 4th Arya Magga, the 4th noble path, all of the fetters have been eliminated, and one obtains final liberation, arahantship. But here the word magga is being used, I would say, in the older, more original sense, the sense which is more typical of the sutras, as a path of practice. In fact, in the Buddha's teachings on the Four Noble Truths, he speaks about the fourth noble truth. He calls it, what is the fourth noble truth? It's dukkha nirodha gamani padipada. So it is the practice going to the end of dukkha, the end of suffering. And then he says, what is that way or that practice leading to the end of dukkha? It is the aryo-atangiko maggo, the Noble Eightfold Path. So in the typical sutta way of explanation, even the Aryan path is the Noble Eightfold Path, which is a padipada, a path of gradual sequential practice that one develops, from day to day, from week to week, month to month, until one reaches the final goal. So it seems to me this is a little bit of a suspicion that the sutta has some influence of later ways of conceiving the development of the path. Still from an early period, but it seems that there is some development of the teaching going on, lying as the background to the sutta. And interesting, maybe this is typical of Venerable Ananda, because Venerable Ananda, we have to remember, was the one who interceded on behalf of the Sakyan women, interceded with the Buddha to get the women ordained as bhikkhunis. So that's a famous incident, preserved account both in the Vinaya, which recounts the origin of the Bhikkhuni Sangha, and later in the Anguttara Nikaya, in the book of, I believe it's the book of 8, Sutta number 51, recounts the same incident, where the Buddha initially rejected the idea of allowing women to enter the monastic order, but Ananda comes to their defense, and using subtle reasoning with the Buddha, finally gets the Buddha to relent and permit women to be ordained. And so it's sort of typical with Ananda's way of thinking that instead of just speaking about bhikkhus, here he says bhikkhu or bhikkhuni. So he's being quite inclusive here, even though when he expounds the sutta, he'll do so in terms of a bhikkhu, but the fact that he's introduced bhikkhu or bhikkhuni implies that even when just bhikkhu is mentioned, we have to understand both bhikkhu and bhikkhunis. Okay, so now we're going to have 4 models or 4 approaches to the attainment of the goal. So the first, and this I would say is the standard, the most familiar model. So here we have the case where a monk, or then I would add, or a bhikkhuni, develops insight preceded by serenity. The expression, a little bit maybe confusing, way is set down. So the way I like to express it is that the bhikkhu develops serenity first, followed by insight. Let me get my note file. Let's just get the whole thing. Okay, so the key expression is samatha pubangamang vipassana. So I say it's a little bit misleading because the emphasis here is on developing vipassana or insight, but and then samatha is put in just as the preliminary or forerunner of insight. But the clearer way to represent this is to say that samatha comes first. Samatha is what I translate here as serenity, maybe a little misleading. You could also use tranquility or calmness, but what is really meant by samatha is samadhi. Samadhi of a very high, involving a very high degree of one-pointed unification of the mind. And that is the basis in this model, basis, foundation for developing insight. So on that basis, one develops vipassana or insight. And the development of insight is what brings the arising of panya or wisdom. Okay, and then as the text continues, let's get the translation. As he is developing insight preceded by serenity. Okay, so he's established a foundation, the basis of serenity, of samadhi, of unification of mind, then goes on to develop insight. And by insight is meant particularly discernment of the, well, let's see, universal characteristics of phenomena, the characteristics embodied, expressed by the five aggregates. So we express, well, I'll come to the meaning of vipassana a little bit later. So as he's developing insight, at a certain point, the text says, the path is generated. In the Pali, Mago Sanjayati. And there's a note here. Let's look at that note. And so the commentary explains this as the first world transcending path. Yeah, actually, there seems to be a difference of opinion between the, the commentary and the sub-commentary. So the commentary says that this is the first world transcending path. Let us look at the commentary. Very convenient. I get it just with a click. This is so for the expression, the path is generated, the path is born. It says that the first world transcending the supramundane path is produced, and that is the path of stream entry. And the path, and again, this is using the Abhidhamma commentarial model of a single, of the world transcending path as being a single mind moment, which has the function of penetrating the ultimate truth, nibbana, and eradicating, eliminating certain fetters or defilements. In the case of the path, the first path of stream entry, it eliminates the conceptualized view of a real self, the doubt about the enlightenment of the Buddha and the effectiveness of the Dharma or the truth of the Dharma, and doubt and the wrong clinging or grasping of precepts and observances. Okay, then let's see the Tika or subcommentary. I see this. Do you see the Pali text?
Yes, Bhante, the ones you've highlighted, the line you highlighted, we can see it. The font is very small though.
Yeah, I'm going to increase it. Is this better? Bigger?
Yes, Bhante, much better.
Okay. So this is what is called the Tika, which means the sub-commentary. So we're getting a bit technical here. So, okay, so the Tika is commenting on the commentary, where the commentary says the first world transcending path is produced, arises. So then it says, this is said with reference to the path of stream entry, but then it gives another possibility that the meaning of this passage, the Pali, in the canonical text, can also be understood by way of the Lokiya Magga, that is the mundane path or the preliminary path. So how do we understand it that way? So when it's said that the path arises, what is meant is that the preliminary mundane path arises, and then one pursues that path by way of the contemplation of disenchantment. One develops it by way of the desire for release, and one cultivates it by way of the contemplation of reflection. It's sort of what the subcommentary is doing is it's mapping these expressions in the canonical text against the stages of insight knowledge, which are detailed in a work like the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification. Or it gives just another way of explaining this. And then it says when the fetters are abandoned and the latent tendencies are eliminated, this should be understood by way of the sequence or succession of the paths. So you can see, you don't have to remember the details of these explanations, but you could see that there are ways in which, interesting ways in which the commentarial, the different layers of commentaries try to unpack and unfold the meaning of the canonical text, and they're not necessarily in perfect agreement about their interpretations. So the canonical text is somewhat open to different modes or models of explanation or interpretation. And I was curious about this. I meant to look this up earlier, but didn't do so. This expression. Yeah, the expression Mago Sanjayati, that the path is born. It occurs in only 2 suttas in the whole Sutta Pitaka. This is one of them. And the other is in the Anguttara Nikaya Book of Fives, Sutta number 57. Which arouses a little suspicion that this also might come from a slightly later period, with this idea of a supramundane path, distinct from the path of practice, has become part of the explanatory tools of the commentaries. So anyway, the important point here, please, everybody should be muted. Okay. The important point here is that one is first developing strong samadhi. Then based on that samadhi, one develops insight. And we could say that the serenity and insight, the samatha and vipassana, constitute the preliminary path of practice. This would be the developing the right concentration of the Noble Eightfold Path. That would be the serenity component. And the insight component would be samadhi, right view, not as conceptual understanding, but a higher level of right view, experiential understanding. And then as those two are working together in one's, say, day-to-day cultivation, at a certain point, a transformation takes place where let's say, the direct, irreversible path to liberation opens up out of the union of serenity and insight. And once that world transcending path opens up, then it becomes sort of permanently available to the practitioner. And so he pursues it, develops it, and cultivates it. And then as he's cultivating this path, then the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. Okay, the fetters, the text usually enumerate 10 fetters, which are abandoned by different paths. So does anybody remember offhand the 10 fetters? I mentioned 3 of them already. The view of a self, the doubt about the Buddha and his teaching, and the clinging or wrong grasp of precepts and observances. What is the fetters that come next?
Rites and rituals.
The lust.
Okay, I already
Sensual
mentioned.
desire.
Ill will.
Wait, one at a time, one at a time.
Ill
Okay.
will and
Sexual desire.
Okay, so I've heard, wait, I've heard. Okay, so I've heard sensual desire, correct. Ill will, correct. So those are 2 fetters. And where are they eliminated?
Non-returner.
Right, the stage of non-returner. So what does the stage of, before that, the stage of once returner, what does that eliminate?
doubt.
and view.
That was eliminated at the first stage. The stage of once returner, what does that eliminate?
Rights and
Lower
rituals.
fetters.
Reduce.
The three
Weaken
lower
sensual
fetters.
desire.
Maybe
and
you have to
weaken-
raise a hand. Don't just speak up, raise the hand. Use the hand symbol. Otherwise, we get too many voices speaking at once. Okay, Eon,
It's the three fetters, which is already taken out. The fourth and fifth is lessened,
okay, that's
but
right.
not eliminated.
Okay, very good. Okay, so the fourth and fifth fetters, the path of the once returner doesn't eradicate any more fetters, but it weakens the fourth and fifth fetter. That is, it weakens sensual desire and ill will. And then it's the third path that eradicates, eliminates sensual desire and ill will. So that leaves the fourth. There are 5 fetters remaining to be eliminated by the fourth path. Can anybody enumerate those fetters? Sud, do you want to do that?
Sure. Conceit, Bhante?
Okay, conceit is one of them. Let's see if we could get them in the traditional sequence. Hint, there are 2 kinds of attachment that are in the 6th and 7th place.
Desire for birth in the formless realm or desire for birth in the formless realm.
Yep.
Right, right. So these,
Conceit,
yeah,
ignorance, ignorance,
you've
and
missed one.
restlessness.
Yeah, you got
Ignorance, restlessness.
first restlessness, then ignorance.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have desire for continued existence into the form realm, or the realm of subtle matter. Then comes the desire or craving for existence in the formless realm, the realm in which all matter is transcended. Then comes conceit, especially the very subtle conceit, I am. And then comes restlessness, a very subtle kind of restlessness. And then last, ignorance. So those are the 10 fetters which are eliminated by the succession of paths. Then there are 7 underlying tendencies. I'm going to have to test myself first. They're not, I can get them, but maybe not in the correct order. So let me do a little search. Unless if there's somebody who can rattle them off without consulting. Tianxiong, can you get the 7 anus? Did you have your hand raised for the 7 anusias? I know where they are.
Sensual lust, ill will, conceit.
Is that the illusion?
Okay, I have them in front of me now.
Anusa, yeah.
Okay, so there's the latent tendency to sensual lust, tendency to patiga, that's aversion, almost the same as ill will. Then ditthi anusaya, to views. Vichikicha is doubt. Mana is conceit. Bhavaraga, that's the craving for continued existence. And avijja is ignorance. So kamaraga corresponds to the fetter of sensual lust, patiga to the fetter of ill will. Ditthi includes both the view of self and the wrong grasp of views of precepts and of observances. Vichikicha is in itself a fetter. Bhavaraga, Anusaya, will include the craving for existence in the form realm and in the formless realm, then the latent tendency to conceit corresponds to the fetter of conceit. And then the latent tendency to ignorance corresponds, of course, to the fetter of ignorance. So the one fetter that's not mentioned among the latent tendencies is restlessness. And so the latent tendency of sensual lust and ill will or aversion will be eliminated at the stage of the non-returner. The latent tendencies to views and doubt would be eliminated by the stream enterer. And then the remaining 3 latent tendencies will be eliminated by the path of arahantship. Okay, so just to sort of summarize this first approach. So we have the practitioner develops first some degree of samadhi, strong samadhi, which serves as the basis for insight. As insight arises, when insight arises, then one continues developing that insight. And when that insight reaches a certain pinnacle, what I would conjecture is that the samadhi and insight come together and merge, or samadhi and panya come together. And out of that, a world transcending path is born. But from the sutta perspective, that path is not necessarily a single mind moment, but it is a path, an irreversible path, a path that has to be going to the final goal. But one still has to develop that path further to continue to practice it. This would be the world transcending Noble Eightfold Path, but from the sutta perspective, not a single mind moment. But one goes on developing the factors of that path, and as one develops it, then there will come about certain breakthrough moments which have the function of abandoning the fetters and uprooting the anusayas, the latent tendencies, in the sequence that we just described. And then when all the fetters are abandoned and all the tendencies have been uprooted, then one can declare the attainment of arahantship, the final knowledge of arahantship. So this is the classical model that conforms to the sort of standard sequence. What's presupposed here is, as a necessity, is sila, or ethical conduct. And then building on that ethical conduct, one develops samadhi. Building on samadhi, one cultivates panya, or wisdom. And then out of wisdom comes vimutti, liberation. Okay, the next approach described by Ananda seems a little bit sort of idiosyncratic according to the standard model. So this is, here the expression used is the monk or the nun or any practitioner, whether monk, whether monastic or layperson, develops serenity preceded by insight. Again, the expression is a little bit, could be a little bit confusing. So let us again go back to the Pali. So the Pali says, Vipassana pubangamang samatang bhaveti. So it seems to be giving the emphasis to the development of samatha, serenity or concentration. But we have to remember that it has, that before one is developing the serenity, there has already been insight. One has already acquired some kind of insight. So on this model, let's put it all together. One develops vipassana first as the forerunner. Then one develops samatha or samadhi. Then comes the magga, the path. So the reason I say this particular structure or model seems a little bit or somewhat bewildering is because normally the texts say again and again, they say, one first establishes the foundation of ethical conduct. On that basis, one develops samadhi. Then based on samadhi, one develops panya or wisdom. So how is this possible to have insight preceding samatha? And this is my own interpretation. I think so this is what the commentary says. So this is a person who naturally gains insight, and based on insight, he produces or develops or acquires samadhi, concentration. So he's naturally a gainer of insight, and then having stood upon or based himself on that insight, he develops or arouses samadhi. So how is this practiced? This is my own understanding. Since I've done myself, it's based on my own experience in practicing in the tradition that flows down from Mahasi Sayadaw and his disciples in Myanmar. So one begins the practice by taking a simple post of observation. In this case, it could be the breath, the rise and fall of the abdomen. And one goes on noting in-breath, out-breath, or rising, falling. And then one attends to whatever occurs in the field of experience, whatever becomes conspicuous, one makes a mental note of that. So if one is hearing sounds, cars going by, people talking, radio playing, one makes the mental note, sound, or hearing. If one experiences some aching in the knees, aching, thoughts come up, memories, you make a mental note, remembering. If you're planning something, you make the mental note, planning. So you keep on making the mental notes of whatever is occurring. And then after you drop that object, come back to rising, falling, and you go on observing the constantly changing field of experience. And as one goes on practicing in that mode, hour after hour, day after day, through the power of sati, the power of mindfulness, what's involved here in noting whatever is occurring is being mindful of it, placing it under observation temporarily under observation. And so that mindfulness is developing power until it becomes that mindfulness, because it's being cultivated as continuously and consistently as possible, it brings along a kind of samadhi. And from that samadhi, the real insight knowledges start to arise. And so it's not the case that one actually has insight knowledges without any degree of samatha or samadhi, but one uses this approach of direct insight, of mindful noting, in order to observe whatever is occurring, in that mindful observation of framing everything that one experiences, putting it into the framework of the 6 sense bases and their objects. So when hearing a sound, one puts it in the framework of sound and ear. When feeling a bodily sensation, put it in the framework of bodily sensation and the body faculty. When thinking a thought, one puts it in the framework of mind and dharmas. Even when eating, you maintain that same mindfulness through the meal. So one puts the experience of eating in the framework of tongue and taste. When smelling the food, in the framework of smelling and the nose. So one is putting everything within the framework of the 6 sense bases and their objects. Or one could also, as the mind becomes more focused, put it into the framework of the 5 aggregates. So as one is sitting, one could be attending to the body as the aggregate of form, bodily form. When feelings arise, painful feelings, just put them in the aggregate of Vedana, of feeling. If pleasant feelings arise, feelings of bliss and happiness, again, just put them into the aggregate of feeling. When you notice anything, sounds, maybe the fragrance of the incense, if you're burning incense, or again, sensations in the body, put it into the aggregate of perception. As you're strengthening your attention to the object, applying the determination to observe the object, put that into the aggregate of sankharas, volitional activities. And whatever one is aware of, you put that awareness, whether through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, or through the mind itself, put that into the aggregate of consciousness. And so one is observing the phenomenological field, the field of experience in terms of the 5 aggregates. So that is a kind of foundational insight, which is being a foundation of insight, which is being established. And then as the mindfulness sort of plunges into that field of insight and becomes steady and balanced in that field, then samatha or serenity arises, and the mind becomes more deeply concentrated. And through that deeper concentration, then what I would say is that a higher level of insight emerges. And that is what gives rise to the path. Okay, let's move now to the 3rd mode. Okay, first I'll go through the 4 of them, then we'll take questions. So we have insight, serenity preceded by insight. Then the 3rd mode is serenity and insight in conjunction. And the text uses an expression here it's a very rare expression. So the expression, he develops samatha and vipassana, so that we still have serenity and insight, but they're developed yuga nadam. The word yuga means a pair. It's a little bit like the English word yoke, to which it's related. When you yoke something, you take two things and bind them together. So you have a yoke. If you have a pair of bulls and you want to use them to pull a cart, you apply the yoke to them. So you have the yoke pair of bulls would be a yuga, and nada means bound together. So bound together under a yoke. So it's translated as here, in conjunction. And there are two ways to interpret this. First, we'll look at the commentary to this, which is the commentarial mode of interpretation. So the commentary says that each time the meditator attains a meditative attainment, that would be a jhana or a formless state, he then explores it. He has to emerge from it and then investigate it by way of its constituents, the conditioned phenomena that make it up. And then having explored the constituents, one then attains the next higher attainment. And so first one attains the first jhana, then one emerges from it and explores it, the constituents, the form, feeling, perception, and so on, as impermanent, dukkha, non-self. Then one enters the second jhana and proceeds in the same way, and so on, all the ways up the scale till one gets to the base of neither perception nor non-perception. So this is the commentarial way of explanation. And according to the commentarial model, when one is absorbed in a jhana, one cannot simultaneously be investigating with insight. Because to investigate with insight, you have to use a certain degree of discursive thinking, even if it's just a very elementary type of thinking, not reflecting, but discerning and labeling and discriminating and distinguishing the five aggregates within the attainment and their characteristic of being impermanent, dukkha, non-self. And that requires some kind of thinking and examination. So that is the commentarial model. But another way I've seen this interpreted, the expression yoked together, that in this mode of practice, serenity and insight are occurring simultaneously, that one is absorbed in the jhana or the formless meditation, and within it, one is discerning with insight. I say here that the commentarial method does not acknowledge this possibility, but several suttas could be read as suggesting that insight can occur within the jhana and does not require that the meditator emerges before beginning contemplation. One example is Anguttara Nikaya, Book of Nines, number 36. And I've brought that in just so that we can take a look at it. Okay, so this is the relevant passage. So here, a monk enters and dwells in the first jhana. Okay, then it gives the standard description of the first jhana. Then it goes on and says, he considers whatever phenomena exists there pertaining to material form, feeling, perception, volitional activities, and consciousness as impermanent, as dukkha. This gets a little strong as rogato is an illness, a boil, a dart, misery, affliction, alien, discriminating, empty, and non-self. Then he turns the mind away from those phenomena and directs it to the deathless element, that is nibbana. Then if he's firm in that, then he attains the destruction of the taints. So if you look at this from one angle, it seems that he's in the jhana, and then he's examining the constituent phenomena of that jhana as impermanent, dukkha. You don't need all these. And just to make it simple, and non-self. And then while still in the jhana, he turns away from those things and then focuses on the deathless element. So with the first jhana, it seems a little bit plausible, but where my doubt about this interpretation starts to emerge is when you get past the first jhana. Let us take the fourth jhana, in which there's no vitakka vichara, no thinking or examination at all. So how could one actually be examining the phenomena there as impermanent, dukkha, and non-self, and noting them as impermanent, dukkha, and non-self? In my way of thinking, that requires some kind of activity of vitakka and vichara, thought and examination, even if it's just the barest discernment and discrimination, or the discernment and identification of those characteristics. Anyway, I won't try to promote one interpretation rather than the others, but just say that different interpretations are possible and have been advanced by different meditators. Okay, then the fourth one is the most interesting, and it's the one that occurs only explicitly only in this sutta. Okay, again, let's come to the Pali. Let me paste it. Okay, so it says the mind, and strangely it uses the word manasa. Let us say the mental activity maybe of the monk has been grasped or seized, it's vigahitam, by restlessness. That's uddhacca, regarding Dhamma. So that is the initial condition. Then it continues, it says, there comes a time, an occasion, when his mind becomes stabilized internally, settles down, one-pointed and concentrated, unified and concentrated. And then the path arises in him. He pursues the path, develops it, and cultivates it. And as he does so, the fetters are abandoned and the underlying tendencies are uprooted. So what is meant by this? the commentary, again, explains this with reference to something called the 10 corruptions of insight, which are elaborated in the Visuddhimagga. These are some special, unusual phenomena that occur as the insight knowledges start to arise. Vision of light, one sees light radiating from one's own body. There comes exhilarating piti or joy, deep serenity, strong energy, waves of energy, the keen insight into the ever-changing flow of experience. Yeah, so there are 10 of these factors that are mentioned, which in themselves are good signs, but when they are grasped wrongly and one gets sort of carried away by them and attached to them, then they become corruptions of insight, because they lead one away from insight. So but I say that nothing in the text itself suggests that the corruptions of insight are involved here. So I understand this, my understanding is that this is what happens in very unusual cases where somebody's mind, the practitioner's mind, can be gripped by agitation, restlessness about something concerning the Dhamma. And then through that restlessness, it leads them to intensive practice. And then through their practice, then at a certain point, the mind settles down, becomes concentrated, and then the insight arises and one realizes the path. And I found an interesting example of this. One example, this is my standard example for this type of approach, which is not so much a conscious approach to practice, but something that some people are almost inevitably pushed to through circumstances. This is illustrated by a poem in the Therigatha, the poems of the enlightened nuns of old. In this case, her name is Siha, the name that means lion. Well, maybe in the feminine, lioness. So I will translate. I just pasted in the Pali, but I'll translate as we go. And these are verses 77 to 81, I think. So she says, because of unwise reflection, I was overwhelmed by sensual lust. The unwise reflection here would be attending to sensual thoughts, the attraction of sensual thoughts. So I was overwhelmed or oppressed by sensual lust. In the past, previously, I was udatta. This is interesting. Udatta is the adjective, agitated or restless, corresponding to the word that I just used here. Udacha is the abstract noun, restlessness. And this is the adjective, restless. In the past, I was restless and without any control over my own mind. Wow, she was like, we would call this a real sad sack case. It seems a hopeless case. So she says, I was overcome by the kilesas, by the defilements. I was flowing along with the subha sanya, the perception of beauty. So that is the perception that triggers sensual lust, perceiving the body as being beautiful. Usually in the text, they explain it as the monk perceives the woman's body as being attractive and beautiful. But here she's a bhikkhuni, so she's perceiving. So she just expresses the perception of beauty, but not specified. But she's anuvatani, so she's carried away by that perception of maybe as sexual indulgence as being something delightful and beautiful. And then she says, I didn't gain calmness of the mind because I was anuga, I was going along under the control of the lustful thoughts. A very sad case. Then she says, Kisa pandu vivanacha, I became thin and pale, and my features became deformed. I went about in that way for 7 years. Wow, 7 years. 7 years, whether by day or by night, I didn't experience any pleasure, any happiness. I was just so miserable, so afflicted. So what is she going to do? Living that way for 7 years, she loses all hope. And then she says, then, having taken a rope, I entered into the woods. And I was thinking, it's better for me that I hang myself right here rather than that I again return to the worldly life. And then she continues, having made a firm noose with the rope, I bound it to the branch of a tree. And then I put the noose around my neck. She's just about to take her own life. So you can see her mind must be really agitated. But then what happens? Then my mind was liberated from the asavas. In other words, she attained arahantship right on the spot. So we can say that this is almost a perfect example of this kind of approach. Coming back. Again, it's not an approach that one should. Please don't go into the woods with a rope, tie it to a tree and put it around your neck thinking this should be an easy way to attain arahantship. But this happens in some cases that the mind is obsessed with restlessness about the Dhamma because she's not able to attain any kind of calm or insight. And then this occasion, that comes this occasion while she's standing under the tree with with the rope tied around a branch, ready to release it. Suddenly, internally, the mind settles down, becomes one-pointed, concentrated, and she gains liberation from the asavas. Okay, maybe we should take some questions in the time that remains. I have to find, no, I've lost. Here it is. Okay, if you have a question, please use the hand symbol. If you had put up the hand symbol earlier and you don't have a question, then take it down. Tian Xiong, do you have a question?
Yes, Bhante,
Okay.
good morning.
Welcome.
So in your fourth example, that Bhikkhuni attained arahantship within the instant, does it means that she gone through the 4 process of the 4 path in sequence, or she straight away attained into the path of arahantship?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because there are several suttas. This one is one example. There are several others which speak about a practitioner attaining arahantship right on the spot. It doesn't mention going through the earlier stages, but the way the commentaries will explain, because the commentaries use that fixed model, that what they say is that she would very quickly have gone through boom, stream entry, then boom, once returning, then boom, non-returning, then finally, boom, arahantship. Yeah, so I can't say which is correct, but if you just rely on the sutta, it seems that one can, maybe if the insight is powerful enough, it can drive one straight to arahantship without going through the earlier stages. But if you rely on the commentarial model, then you go through very quick succession through the stages.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
next question. We say Ali.
Thank you, Bhante, for your teachings. I've heard that the rites and rituals are also part of the feathers. I'm not sure if that's like embedded in one of those, or can you comment on that, please?
Yeah, that's actually an alternative translation of Sila Bhatta, but I think it's a wrong translation. It's a common translation coming maybe from the Victorian, post-Victorian age translators who were maybe Protestants reacting against the Roman Catholic Church's emphasis on rites and rituals. But the Pali expression is Sila Bhatta. So Sila means precepts or rules of behavior. And the term Vata usually refers to the kind of ascetic practices that were undertaken by the Buddha's contemporaries, like fasting for long periods, sleeping on beds of thorns, exposing one's going about naked, exposing one's body to extreme heat and cold, and so on. Yeah.
But that's not, in your opinion, that's not part of the Pali Canon suttas there. It's been.
Rites and rituals?
Yes.
That the translation of Sila Bhatta as rites and rituals, I would say, is an inaccurate translation of Sila Bhatta. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Ian.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
Yes, just a quick question on Serenity. How many levels of jhana are we looking at? Probably you can just explain a bit more about that.
Say again, I didn't catch.
Yeah, so Serenity refers to, of course, the jhanas.
Yeah.
Now, are we talking about the 4 jhanas or up to the 8 jhanas to achieve liberation?
Yeah, the samatha or serenity, following the explanation, the commentaries, would be the 8 meditative attainments, the 4 jhanas and the 4 arupa, formless meditations, and access concentration. That is a stage of concentration preceding the first jhana, but with enough unification of mind to serve as a basis for insight. Okay, and Fong.
Good morning, Bhante.
Good morning.
Bhante, when the chitta the chitta occurring in the process of develop inside of on impermanent Bhante,
Yeah.
when the chitta going seeing phenomenal going past very quickly, is that a mundane or super mundane chitta, Bhante? And how can we know what is I'm not sure how can we determine what is mundane and what is super mundane.
If it's observing impermanence,
Yes.
then it would still be what is called the mundane path, because the word mundane is a little unsatisfactory, because in English, mundane suggests something ordinary or worldly, but technically the mundane path is the path of insight focused upon the impermanent nature and the dukkha nature and the non-self nature of conditioned phenomena of the 5 aggregates. And the supramundane, or the world transcending wisdom, That is the wisdom that takes nibbana as its object. Okay, is that clear? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, so, whoops.
Hello, can you hear me, Bhante?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for taking my question. So is there a particular meditation technique that is best suited for developing serenity, or is it just would depend on the practitioner? Also, is serenity truly something that someone can achieve in lay life in the modern world, especially given so many disturbances and things to do during the course of the day for somebody in like, I guess, not a monk?
Yeah, first, as far as meditation subjects go, there's no like fixed assignment. This meditation subject is exclusively the best one for serenity, but there are different meditation subjects which vary according to the temperament of the meditator. Generally, for the developing strong samadhi, mindfulness of breathing would be recommended, or one of the kasina objects, like a colored disc. And of course, for developing strong samadhi, a lot of this depends on the different past life, we call these dispositions and accumulations of the practitioner. So we can't lay down general rules, but generally if one wants to develop strong samadhi, it will take like a period of withdrawal from ordinary activities, a period of retreat in which one devotes oneself to intensive practice. Yeah, so it's not something for developing when one is in the midst of everyday activities, but some practitioners who will have strong dispositions from previous lives can be very busy in their day-to-day activities, but they go off and do their regular, maybe hour morning and hour evening meditation, and they're able to go into the jhana. But those would be unusual cases. Normally, to develop the jhanas, one needs extended periods of seclusion and intensive practice. Okay.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
I think we
Sorry.
I see that there's a number
No
of
problem.
people here.
No
Okay,
problem.
yeah, I just have time for about 2 more. Vinyu?
Yes, good morning, Bhante. I have this question in regards to the Arupa Jhana. So at the Arupa Jhana of neither feeling nor perception, so I wonder, is the volition thought still a seed? If it
Is the what?
Is it still there, the volition thoughts? So is it correct to understand that at the Arupa Jhana of neither feeling nor perception, it is still not anicca vata sankhara?
Again, which attainment are you speaking about? You said neither feeling nor perception.
Yes.
But there's one, the fourth formless meditation is called neither perception nor non-perception. And then there's an attainment called the cessation of perception and feeling.
Yes, the cessation of feeling and perception.
Yeah, in that state, there's no mental activity at all. That is the complete cessation of mental activity.
So there are no sankhara.
No sankharas there.
So at that stage, but it's still not nibbana.
No, that is not nibbana. No, that is not nibbana. It's a meditative absorption. Is said to be accessible only to non-returners and arahants who have already mastered the 8 preceding attainments, the 4 jhanas and the 4 formless meditations.
So normally at the wake where people mention anicca vata sankhara, so are they that means that person has entered nibbana or not entered nibbana yet?
Anicca vata sankhara. Anicca sankhara just means that everything conditioned is impermanent. It doesn't have any direct relation to nibbana.
Oh, okay. So it's asankhara, then it's deathless.
Asankata means,
Asankhara.
yeah, that is that which is not a sankhara. That is nibbana.
So that is not jhana number 9 or
No,
the
no, no, no.
cessation. So it's a complete cessation. Sorry.
Yeah. This is difficult to explain briefly. I think we'll just have to move on. We'll only be able to take one more question.
All right. Okay, thank you.
Okay, from Marcel.
Thank you, Bhante. So I have a question about doubt being eliminated when one attains stream entry. It seems to me those who ordain have a strong confidence in the Buddha's teachings.
Yeah.
So, but how is this confidence by the monastics different from doubt being eliminated by stream enterers?
Yeah, what one could be ordained as a monastic for 50 years and still occasionally give rise to thoughts of doubt because one doesn't have absolute certainty about the truth of the Dhamma. But it's the stream enterer is one who is described as Dita Dhammo, one who has seen the Dhamma, Nyata Dhammo, known the Dhamma, fathomed the Dhamma. So they see the truth of the Dhamma just as easily as when you hold up your hand. I hold up my hand in front of my face, I can see my hand. So I know that my hand is in front of me. So that's like the stream enterer sees the hand of the Dhamma, so they have no doubt at all. But until that point is reached, maybe a better example is if I'm holding something in my hand. I don't have anything small enough. So you might have some doubt about what I'm holding in my hand because you don't see it, but if I hold it up and show you what it's used for, then you have no doubt that it's a nail clipper. So now you've seen it, so you know. So it's like, that is the way you could still have strong confidence and devotion to the Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, but it's only when you get to be sotapanna that you see the truth and then you eliminate the tendency to doubt. Okay, we're going to have to stop the program because I have to go up there actually waiting for me to come for the lunch. So I'm just going to do a quick sharing of the merits and then, yeah, then we'll have to end. And please join us next week, same time, same station. Akasata Chubumata Devanaga Mahedika Punyantang Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Sasanam. Akasata Chubumata Devanaga Mahedika Punyantang Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Desanam. Akasata Chubumata Devanaga Mahedika Punyantang Anumodipa Chirang Rakantu Mankarang. May those in suffering be free from suffering. May those in fear be free from fear. May those in sorrow be free from sorrow. May all living beings also be thus. We go sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. To Bhante, bow
Okay,
to
so thank
Bhante.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Bhante.
Bhante.
Thank you, Bhante.
Thank
Thank you,
you,
Bhante.
Okay, I'm going.
Thank you.
Keep safe. Take care. Be safe. Thank you, Bhante. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to have to end.
Bye.
Okay.
And the Saturday.